Hey, welcome. So today I'm talking to my friend Belinda, and we've actually worked together a couple of times already. Today we're going to talk about Belinda's virtual session that we did last month, and also talk about her own journey. So on that, how about you get started, Belinda? Let us know a little bit about yourself.
I can't believe it's only been like a month or something, like since we shot. My life has gone through so much transition, even since our shoot. Um, so it's nice to kind of revisit this. Like temporally, it hasn't been that long, but it's also been so much for me. So thank you so much for asking to interview me and ask me the questions about like my process and like what was going on for me, because it was a huge transition in my life when you reached out and asked if I wanted to do a virtual shoot, in the middle of quarantine. Like craziness was happening in my life. And throughout quarantine, I went through a transition of deep soul searching and decided to separate from my partner, to leave our shared apartment. And I'm also in the process of figuring out a new career path. So literally everything has changed in my life. And I realized the one big thing that I was lacking was the tools, the awareness and tools to really love myself. And I realized that we're going to get really deep and personal right now. But I realized that I have been a serial monogamer in relationships, long term relationships after the other. And I haven't been alone, single by myself for a really long time. And when quarantine hit, that was obviously even more apparent. Living with a partner, all of a sudden, we were stuck together all the time. And I realized that I wasn't happy with the dynamic and I craved alone time. But when I craved that alone time, I didn't know necessarily how to use that alone time and how to make sure that I felt rejuvenated and nourished during my alone time. So I started a practice of exploring what self love meant to me. And a lot of it had to do with me seeing myself honestly, and and then letting go of the judgments that I have of myself, and learning to love myself the way that I've loved other people. And I'm still in that process, and it's a struggle because it's a completely new practice. And I found that even after I moved out, like I had to revisit and reassess and go back to these self-love techniques because it's not natural for me. So when you reached out to me, I had just decided that I needed to get into a self-love practice, which for me is different than like a self-care practice. Self-care is very make sure you're fed, make sure you have enough water. It's like the very physical, like basic necessities. But self-love to me really means looking at yourself the way that you look at a romantic partner who you're deeply in love with. And I wanted to experience that. I wanted to look at myself in the mirror. I wanted to make love to myself. I wanted to make sure that I felt that I could provide for myself in the ways that I had become codependent in relationships. So you reached out to me, and I immediately had this idea of, well, what would it look like if we documented me wooing myself, me creating these photos that was for not just for me to look at in a pleasing way, but like for me to get like hot and bothered by, for me to get excited by myself, by these images of myself. I I've always looked at myself from a very detached perspective because I'm I've been a performer for such a long period of my life. I was an opera singer for, I don't even know, most of my adult life, at least 16 years. And so I was used to being in a position of I'm presenting myself and I'm receiving other people's feedback or critique. And so there's kind of like this detached relationship that you end up having with yourself, because if you don't detach, you'll take things too personally. And so of course, I've taken photographs before, I've had performances recorded and whatnot, and it's always very performative. And it's always for other people. And so this virtual shoot with you was finally a chance for me to like do it for myself. Like, yes, other people are going to see it, but it didn't matter how other people were going to respond to it. It was whether or not I could get myself excited. And that was such an interesting process. Like,
well, and it's
I don't know what.
I just want to say, like, it's that whole, when you go into it with that thought of like, because we're so used to doing things like, especially social media is all about the intention of, like, you take a picture for Instagram, you put it on Instagram with the intention of sharing it, with the intention of, either updating people about your life or showing off or, whatever, maybe just the validation of like, oh yeah, people like me or like what I do. But then when you have that approach of like, okay, well, this is like at its core, this is just for me. Like, no one even needs to see it. Like at the time, your Instagram was totally private. It was only your close friends following. And yeah, that changes the whole dynamic when it's for you.
Yeah, and that's something that I really try to have a clear intention about now that my Instagram is public. And now that I am sharing so much more about myself, whether it's a story or whether it's photographs and visuals, I want to make sure that it always comes from a place of me really bearing myself, of me really seeing my true self, and in that exposing that to other people. And it involves a lot of vulnerability. The fact that I couldn't even be myself with myself is just mind-blowing, and it's difficult to get to that place where I want to see myself, where I want to see like everything that I've thought that has been ugly or imperfect about myself, and to see those things and let go of the judgments that I have about myself, and then offer it love, like unconditional love. If a family member or a loved one came to you and told you like, I hate this thing about me, like, we don't see those things in other people. We love them despite those things. We offer them unconditional love. And why is our love for ourselves so conditional? So learning that process of like, I can be ugly on the inside or have moments where I feel ugly or I'm judging myself, but still also love myself. And that's okay. And if there's something about me that I want to work on, like to be able to take that in stride and not internalize it so much that it immobilizes me, but to take it and understand like, okay, I see you. It's okay. I will attend to you. And let's share this process with other people, because it'll speak to them too, because it's not easy. It's a lot of this stuff, internal work that we do, we can feel so alone. I can feel so alone. And so when I share this process with other people, I find that it really resonates with them. And it's really finding your own voice throughout this too.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. Yeah, no, there's so much to think about. I mean, I had another video interview with someone recently. We also talked about how we kind of have so much self-judgment about ourselves, and it's things that are so like, it might be something physical, or it might be something about our personality or something that like oftentimes we might see as a flaw, but only because we're faced with seeing ourselves all the time, and we, fixate on these things, and then we fixate on the problems and then forget about all the benefits. And, and sometimes these things we consider flaws might not even be a flaw. It might just be like, just something like, oh, my nose is big or something. And it's like, well, okay, like, so what? But it takes a lot of inner, I guess, coming to terms with yourself and accepting yourself, and that, like you said, that unconditional love, the way that you would have unconditional love for someone that you deeply admire and love and respect as a, friend or partner. And then giving yourself permission to have that same attitude towards yourself. And I think that usually we kind of see each other or see ourselves as like, almost kind of disappear in our own view. We just see ourselves as like, oh, I'm not this body. I'm the mind that's inside here. And I think this body is not good enough, or lacking in some way, or I've got some injury or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just such a hurtful way.
Even to take that like a step further, like for women to be seen in a seductive way in a very patriarchal society where like the lens of media is through how can we sexualize women, and how can we profit from that? And so as a woman, how do we express our sexuality, our sensuality without feeling victim to that sort of narrative? How do we take that back and empower ourselves so that we are not objects of whatever meaning you want to put on it, but a sort of objectification of women? How do we make sure that we are still human? How do we make sure that we're authentically represented? Like what about our sexuality feels most authentic to ourselves? We're told how to look and how to feel sexy. And sometimes when you sit down and really think about it, you'll realize, hey, you know what? That's only what I've been told, like people are supposed to do. People are supposed to look, what sexy looks like is, being scantily clad or having a certain kind of attitude. And that might be true for some people, but also to look from the inside out of not just what society tells us is supposed to be sexy, but what makes us feel sexy. During our shoot together, I got into my headspace like for about like an hour before I started playing some music that I really wanted to like embody the attitude of what I wanted. And we did 2 looks. We did one look that was like this like badass bitch mode, and then one look that was like the soft, intimate, private side a little bit. And I wanted both of those represented because I feel like that they're both me. And I find them both equally pleasing too. And so for me, like music really helps me get into the mode of like, what do I want each look to feel like, rather than what do I want each look to look like. And then picking out my outfits and accessories, I tried on everything to make sure that I felt comfortable, but also that it felt like it represented what I wanted to show on the outside, and what I was feeling on the inside. Those attitudes that I have, I'm like, does this feel like that? Do I feel like that in this, and it's just so easy, I think, especially with any sort of like visual representation, to start from the outside in and to decide what we want the aesthetic or the design to look like, but when you're doing a personal project for yourself, like the virtual shoot, like it gave me a chance to really think about, how do I want myself to shine?
And what was the actual experience of being in front of the camera like? Because I think a fair number of the people watching this may have never done a photo shoot, since they were in, taking their senior portraits, So what was that like, and how did that headspace kind of feel like when you were in the flow of the session?
Luckily, you and I are friends and we've shot together plenty of times before, and I've shot with other people plenty of times before. So it's not super uncomfortable for me to be in front of the camera, but I definitely, before each shoot, I get into my head a little bit. So stuff that helps me get out of my head and relax, like sometimes people like to have like a glass of wine. I like to have a little bit of cannabis. Like that helps me chill out. Do whatever makes you feel centered and grounded and calm. Maybe it's like a little ritual where you're smudging or, meditating or something. But definitely grounding yourself in some way, because you're going to be a little amped up no matter what. And then during the process of just like understanding that if you leave room to play, magic can happen. If you go in with a really hard expectation of how things are going to look, you will most likely be disappointed, because things never look exactly how we visualize it. That sort of perfectionism only exists inside of our heads. But if we allow the space for things to transform throughout the process, and when you and I were working together, we would try things like, hey, why don't we put the camera here? Why don't we move this here? Why don't we try this? There's a lot of experimentation, I think, that people don't really see behind the scenes. People think that just the photos come out and it's magic and it's very posed. And some photographers do work like that. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. It's not your style, but I appreciate that, because then it gives room for like, oh my God, we just caught something really magical that we both didn't expect,
Yeah. Well, it's like that. Like I have this whole philosophy on art, and like you said, like when you leave space for the magic to happen, just having that sense of like the way I like to work is I just kind of work to kind of figure out, okay, well, let's figure out what the location is, maybe pick out a couple outfits, pick out the time of day so we have the lighting right. But then once we have those things, we can just kind of follow the mood and follow intuition. And I think we picked out flowers, and then also maybe I think you had like that mirror. Like I didn't have any plans for what we'd do with the mirror. I'm not sure if you had any specific ideas going in, but then we decided like, okay, well, let's play with the mirror. Let's try this angle, try that angle. And I have this, little motto that 90% of photography is rearranging furniture. It's all about like trying different angles and moving over here and trying this. And then you'll find something that you didn't expect, and it'll just be magic. And that's like, and like you said, it's if you have like a preconceived idea, sure, you can do it sometimes. I've definitely done it, and there's lots of photographers who work with very strict posing, and they'll have like a whole catalog of these are the poses. But I really believe it's more about just moving and finding that space where you're feeling comfortable and sexy, because then anything we take will show that. Like it's visible in your eyes. And yeah.
Boudoir is also just so personal, right? Like people who come to Boudoir are either doing it for themselves or they're doing it for a loved one. Maybe you're doing it for like social media, if that's what like your brand is built upon. But for the most part, like it's not something that you're sending to your mom and dad in your Christmas card, So definitely having like a more natural like flow to it, I think encourages people to really explore and try things and take initiative too. I had that mirror. I like pulled that aside. We hadn't really talked about much other than like time of day and like all of that. So like it's nice sometimes, like if you end up having ideas like as you're thinking about going into the shoot, like and you want some props or something, like set those items aside, because I know like with you, I'm always like, hey Shane, I have this thing, what do you think? And like it's always like awesome. And like you'll always let me try it, even if you're like, you know what, maybe that's not working. But it's nice like to have those creative ideas also. And like how often do you get to like try like have that creative exploration, you know?
Yeah. No, it's a whole, and that's what I do love about the whole process is, you know, because it is, boudoir is so deeply personal. And, you know, we always bring different things into it. You know, we'll bring in, you know, like you said, like the props or whatever. But the other thing is, like you said, people always do it usually for themselves. Occasionally people will do it for a partner. Um, I think like 9 out of 10 people the people I work with do it for themselves. And, you know, they also bring in like whatever kind of personal state they're in. You know, in your case, you'd been going through a lot, and you were like right in the middle of, you know, all the things that you're talking about earlier were kind of all coming together at once, you know. And your session had a particularly beautiful and almost melancholy feeling. I feel like you brought like this very like, and I think this is kind of maybe just you know, exposing the limitation of the English language, that like there's no word between like sexy and melancholy, but you were there, you know, like I feel like there's just all these different gradients, like nothing's black and white, right? I mean, of course I say that I shoot all black and white, but nothing's, aside from photography, nothing's black and white. And like being able to explore that nuance and like that, those little subtle feelings, and being able to explore yourself and find aspects, and also just explore that, you know, those themes of like, cool, I'm a bad bitch, you know. For some of the photos you were wearing like black, and then the other photos you were doing kind of like in light and lace, and those were like, you know, the softer, more intimate ones. And, you know, it's just magical to just be able to dress up and play and explore those different aspects of yourself.
I'm definitely a very emotional and sensitive person. And also I think being a performer, I'm not always able to hide everything. Like it shows on my face. I'm just a very I can gesticulate a lot. Like I'm a very like expressive person. So it's not easy for me to hide anything. So it doesn't surprise me that like it had that air to it. I can get very moody. I can feel very melancholic and dark sometimes. And like, I'm glad that that was represented and like that it was sensed throughout the shoot, because that is a part of my personality. And, you know, it wasn't just like I'm going to be fucking sexy. Like it was let me explore my sensuality and like, and the struggles that come along with it too. And yeah, it's not cut and dry, right? We definitely bring a lot of energy into these personal projects. And it's not just about like the outfit that you wear or the pose that you stand in.
Yeah, no, I always consider the poses and the props to be like, you know, secondary or like barely even relevant. And you know, the poses themselves, like most of the poses I'll take pictures constantly, because, you know, and have people moving, because I know it's not the pose, it's the body language between the poses that's interesting. You know, it's like the way you kind of look down, you know, have like a certain glance, says way more about where you are in your life than, you know, putting your hands up on your hips or something. Yeah, it's you know, like we said earlier, it's those little, making the space, those little magic moments.
How do you find that taking shots virtually, like do you find that timing or quality is ever affected with capturing those things?
Um, Yes and no. I think that like certainly there is a difference between shooting in person. In person, I just have so much more flexibility in terms of repositioning myself to find the best angles, and it becomes a much more quick thing where I can just be like, okay, move over here, move over there, like turn that way, and then I can just find it, find stuff that's more dramatic instantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so but then when I'm shooting virtually, I have to shoot way more. I probably
Mm-hmm.
take I might take like almost up to 2 or 3 times as many photos as I would
Mm-hmm.
in a normal session, in a virtual session, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking screenshots. And in
Yeah.
person, I've got the timing where I know, like, I can see a moment, click, get it, and I've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Virtually, I might, by the time I see it, by the time the moment shows up on the screen, it might be gone by the time I'm like, that's perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of shooting a lot faster. And so my process has to be a bit more fluid, and I do have to spend a lot more time going through and taking out all the photos. Okay, like this isn't great, is this one or this one, these are almost the same, which one's better? So I have to be a bit more picky with that. And then also there's like that whole aspect of like rearranging the camera to finding angles and positions. And then also depending on, the lighting, things are different. Like I actually had to, the reason why my camera's facing this way is because if I had my camera more that way, I'd be so backlit, my face would be in total darkness, even though the room's well lit. So you have to kind
Yeah.
of adjust for those concerns also. But I definitely feel like with the virtual sessions, like it's possible to get so much more intimate just because you're basically paring down everything, right? Like you're not even in some other person's studio.
That was definitely a very comfortable thing for me, was like the fact that I could do whatever I want in my bedroom, like that already like added a whole other layer of safety for me as a woman. Just like me feeling like I'm in my element, like I'm at home. That was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, yeah, and you're at home. I mean, I'm speaking to you exactly like this through the computer. But other than that, like you're by yourself, and I think that there is a dynamic that happens with an in-person session that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen with a virtual session, just because you're talking to a computer. But it's like chocolate and vanilla. Like they're both great. They both have different. They just have a different kind of attitude, and you just have to account for that. But yeah, I mean, I would greatly enjoy doing the virtual sessions. I think they're a lot of fun, and I personally am so thankful that we have internet and everyone has devices that can do video calls now. Because and I'd be suffering if
I
I couldn't
know.
be working with people.
I know. How did we survive before without internet?
I
What
don't.
would people do during a pandemic? They would play board games and do puzzles.
Oh, I hate board games.
You would have
Puzzles
to
are
call
okay.
someone's
I
phone
think people just play like
landline.
GoldenEye 64 and like Smash Brothers all day. I think that's what
Oh
I would do.
yeah,
That's the
that's crazy.
pre-internet days.
I'd probably be. You know what? I'm finding that I'm watching less TV nowadays, anyways, which is really awesome. I have a lot of time to learn things, which I never had time to do that before as like an adult. I feel like, and that's been really awesome.
That's
So
great. Yeah,
yeah,
I've been diving into arts. I actually just got a bunch of paints. I'm going to start doing some Bob Ross
yay,
presentations this weekend, I think.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have anything else you want to mention or type up?
I think I've shared my story. You know, I think that's it. I think,
Okay, great.
yeah, I had a great experience with you. So
Yeah,
I
well,
hope
thank
that
you
came
so
through.
much, Belinda. I had a great time talking to you. I hope everyone watching this got some interesting information to think about from Belinda. Yeah, that was awesome.
Thanks,
Okay.
Shane.
Thanks, Belinda. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.